Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webcast, Inside Continuous Monitoring, Insider Threat, and Beyond, Session 1, sponsored by DLT Solutions, ForeScout, and Symantec. I'm Steve LeSueur, a contributing editor for Custom Media with the 1105 Public Sector Media Group. We are the publisher of FCW, GCN, Washington Technology, and Defense Systems magazines, and I will be your moderator today. Now, today's webcast is the first of a three-part series on continuous monitoring and proactive cybersecurity that has been put together by our sponsors. And at the end of our program today, I will provide you with more information about the dates, times, and specific topics of our next webcast. But before we begin today, let's go over a few housekeeping items. First, our webcast will be approximately an hour long. Near the end of the hour, our speakers will host a question and answer discussion. If at any time during the presentation you would like to submit a question, just look for the Q&A box, type in your question, and hit the submit button. And please ask as many questions as you like. Even if we don't have time to get to all of your questions during our program, we will respond via email to unanswered questions after our time expires. If you have any technical difficulties during the program, click on the question mark icon located below the slide window. And here I'll also add that you can often solve technical problems simply by hitting the F5 function to refresh your console. And in addition, you can enlarge the slides by clicking the green button in the slides window. And finally, after the session is completed, we will be emailing you a link to the archived version of this webcast so you can view the presentation again if you like, or share it with an interested colleague. And that brings us to today's webcast. Now, by all accounts, the sophistication and volume of attacks on government networks and systems continues to grow. So consequently, visibility across the network in real time is essential for combating these increasingly relentless cyber attacks and security breaches. And so in today's program, we are going to look at how agencies can integrate Symantec and ForeScout to mature their cybersecurity capabilities through a unified cybersecurity approach. Now, one of the fundamental building blocks for achieving this maturity is the ability to properly manage hardware and software assets, because this gets right at the heart of cybersecurity. You can't protect what you can't see. And so that's the topic of today's discussion. And so speaking today, we have Tom Blovelt, who is a security architect with Symantec, where he provides technical leadership to the Continuous Monitoring Strategic Program. And then after Tom, we will hear from Sean Tellis, who is the ForeScout Federal Solutions Architect supporting federal partners, programs, and systems integrators. Tom and Sean have prepared an excellent program today, and so without further ado, let's turn the time over to our first speaker, Tom Blovelt. Tom, are you ready to begin?
I am, Steve, and thank you so much, and thank you, everyone, for participating today. Look forward to having a lively topic to discuss with you here. On the agenda, we'll level set the conversation today by talking about the threat landscape, recent breaches, and this topic of cyber hygiene. We'll then move to discussing components of the unified cybersecurity solution that our customers are bringing to bear in their fight against hackers and malware and the different threats that they're encountering today. But more so than ever, cybersecurity professionals have a lot to be concerned with. Threats, vulnerabilities, exploits are numerous and they're difficult to keep track of, monitor, let alone mitigate. And to this, we have other demands and pressures coming from the complexity of IT systems, cloud environments, the proliferation of mobile devices, demands to support remote and mobile workers, advanced persistent threats, and regulatory requirements, and all these things are making for a very busy security professional. Now, couple this with the shortage of skilled security labor. Per various reports, the market today is alone short 300,000 cybersecurity professionals in the U.S., and this number is expected to grow to reach 1 million in the near future. And lastly, further exacerbating the difficulty is budget pressures that most of us have to deal with as we're under the gun to make essentially right moves all the time. Failure to make the right moves can have devastating consequences for our mission and the folks that we support. The threats we deal with continue to gain in complexity and prevalence. For example, we've seen a 500% increase in ransomware attacks, and their complexity even now continues to evolve, making them more difficult to defend against. 2013 was called the year of the breach. There was so many records and that were lost, and so many identities stolen, and so many exploits that were successful. It broke many records. Now, as we begin to compile the data from 2014, many sources are beginning to say that we've even exceeded the record set to 2013, which was, again, the year of the breach. State sponsors are tremendously active in compromising our systems and exfiltrating sensitive data. And besides the normal culprits like China and Russia, other countries like Syria, Iran, North Korea, and others are quickly maturing their cyber warfare capabilities and hacking capabilities. And added to that, with the threat of the Internet, or with the Internet of Things looming on the not-so-distant horizon and the threats that come with that, we have even more work to do to prepare for this new era that's going to be here before we know it. So to help us appreciate what we're up against, the Office of Management and Budget released the following statistics. So every 3 days on a federal network near you, we're seeing trillions of cyber events, billions of flaws and defects in our systems, millions of attacks, thousands of new flaws as new vulnerabilities are introduced, and hundreds of successful attacks. And every 3 months, we're seeing over 10,000 successful attacks and terabytes of stolen data. And if this weren't bad enough, the OMB reports that an unknown number of these attacks have even been repaired. So at this rate, what happens when we begin to introduce additional systems that have greater complexity to our environment? Unless we do something different and better than what we've been doing today, these numbers, unfortunately, have nowhere to go but up. Now, if you look at the last two bullets here, you'll see that 7,200 reports were written and hundreds of labor hours were wasted over the course of this 3-month period of time. What does this mean? Well, it means that while we're busy documenting the state of our systems and controls necessary to secure those systems, by the time our reports are even printed and put into their nice 3-ring binders, they're essentially out of date. The threatscape is changing that rapidly, and as such, we're unable really to use the old manual processes and methodologies to stay ahead of the threat. So we have to do something different. So I'm going to turn it over to Sean to discuss some of the examples of what's happening in the cybersecurity arena and as a result of these threats. Sean?
Thanks, Tom, and thanks everyone on the phone for your time today. So for the next 2 slides, we're going to discuss a series of breaches starting back from 2012, and we have linked this article at the bottom of the slide, so when you see your copy, it's from a publication from nextgov.com. And with these, we're going to organize them in somewhat of a loose chronological order. Now, I'm not going to read every example here, but we're going to touch on a few key ones. And I think you're going to see some patterns are emerging in the attacks, how they're done, who the states are that are sponsoring them, and kind of, what we're doing from a reactive posture and what's really happening. So the first one really was in 2012, 2013, Zai-Feng Chen, who was an employee of the National Weather Service. She was arrested for stealing data, specifically dam database information. Now, while she worked for the National Weather Service, that dam database information was actually located on the Army Corps of Engineers network. So what we're seeing is cross-infiltration from an insider attack on that was then brought back to China. In 2012 and 2013, the Energy Department and U.S. Census Bureau, a gentleman from Nigeria, had created a fraudulent website very much mirroring what employees were seeing in their normal day-to-day work life. And what he was doing was stealing the logins from those pages to then go back onto the real website, purchase equipment, and then sell that back to the Nigerian government. In late 2012, the U.S. Army and through several commercial organizations, through an organization called the Xbox Underground, they had regularly accessed, stole, and sold proprietary information, including the Apache helicopter training software. Now, what's interesting about this example is that was actually accessed through a commercial network through Zombie Studios, as the Army was working with them on a video game and they were collaborating. Xbox Underground was able to hack into Zombie Studios and then through a back door access that data. More recently, we're still seeing now even more patterns emerging, and specifically the two states here are China and Russia, and that's not by accident. And as Tom said, there are other actors out there, but China and Russia were specific to these organizations to this example. In March 2014, with the government printing and accountability offices, which aren't hugely strategic or very big, but what they were saying is that China was coming in and infiltrating those networks, but more for reconnaissance and testing of agency defenses. What this means is that everyone's at risk, not just the high-profile Pentagon or Army or military or you know, three-star agencies. Everyone, those small agencies, the middle agencies, these are what our adversaries are using to test their mechanisms, test their procedures, and then launch bigger attacks when appropriate. Also in August 2014, we'll talk a little more about cyber hygiene, but with healthcare.gov, while were never able to track who actually committed it, there was a malware insertion on servers in that network by basically using the default password. This is a huge cyber hygiene issue, and we'll talk more about that, about what that means and how you can use that to protect your environment. Also, we see links between attacks potentially in October 2014 and November 2014 with the White House and the U.S. State Department, where Russia had been identified as the offender for basically attacking unclassified mail networks and taking mail and the data within that mail. So again, we're able to launch repetitive attacks across dissimilar organizations within our government. And finally, most recently in November of 2014, very well publicized China attack of the U.S. Postal Service, compromising nearly 800,000 employee sensitive data. So what does all this mean? There's a critical importance to strong cyber hygiene. Recently, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which is a bipartisan nonprofit organization with over 50 years of experience in developing solutions for large-scale problems, reported that just true proper cyber hygiene can stop up to 85% of all cyber attacks. And specifically, it goes on to say, the study goes on to say, asset discovery and monitoring, which is the first sub-bullet. Searching for, finding, and fixing the worst cyber problems is near first real time. And generally those issues are found in the unmanaged, undiscovered asset, which is pervasive throughout many organizations, both commercial and federal. 75% of attacks are using known vulnerabilities. So general whitelisting technologies, had they been implemented properly, had they been in place and been up to date, they would have stopped at the 75% of those attacks. And basically, basic hardening would have helped 90% of successful attacks that require only the most basic techniques, such as registry settings, turning off services that are not required, things that we see every day in our common secure implementation guides or industry best practices and agency policies. And finally, 96% of all breaches can be avoided if the victim puts simple or intermediate controls in there. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that and a little more about how the Symantec and ForeScout solution can help automate a lot of that. So given the status quo of the problem, people and processes need more than a siloed, standalone set of technologies to combat this epidemic. So, strong cyber hygiene, as we've stated, starts with knowing what is on your network at all times. So I want you all to ask yourselves privately, can I accurately put a number on how many wired and wireless assets on my network? Assuming that you could answer that question, would you be able to know how many of our particular asset type, such as what are my Windows boxes, my Linux or Unix, Apple, my mobile systems, printers, IP phones, networking devices, security appliances, so on and so forth? Do I know the trusted state of those? So once I know what's on my network, do I know its state? Do I know how trusted it is? Is it being managed by something, even as simple as Active Directory? Is it unmanageable? Where are my guest systems and how are those being used and accessed? Do I have any unknown devices that I know there's something there, but I don't know what it is? Any devices that may be misconfigured, such as a patch setting is off and needs to be remediated, or a registry setting is not set right and needs to be fixed, or rogue devices. Now, I'll touch a little bit on what Tom and I are talking about rogue. Rogue's used a lot these days, and what we mean by rogue is something that's not doing or behaving appropriately. So a print server that makes an IRC call out to the internet generally would be a rogue device. Print servers generally don't make IRC calls, and they generally don't talk to the internet. So that gives you kind of an example of what we're meaning by rogue. So are my devices behaving properly? And then compliance. Am I compliant with my antivirus policies, my patch policies? My software, are we installing the right software? If we have a standard software set and then we need to allow some users to go outside that scope, how are we controlling that? Are we monitoring that? Are we making sure that they're operating within their agreed boundaries? Agency, configuration, and industry standard best practices. How are we taking those best practices and working them into our IT security service staff? Now I want you to ask yourself, how well can I protect my assets, data, and personnel without a complete picture of what is on my network? And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Tom.
Thanks, Sean. So in order to have a complete picture of our environment, we must have visibility into a variety of systems and sensors. But not only visibility, we must also have the ability to make decisions based on information held within these systems. And data points from multiple systems may need to be leveraged together in order to make complex decisions. These decisions then must engage appropriate processes and activities for risk mitigation to occur. So for example, a signal may be produced from one of the many semantic sensors that you see in this slide. In the use cases we're going to be sharing here, we'll show that ForeScout has the ability to take and ingest a signal and convert it into action for risk mitigation. And that's where this idea of control fabric in the center of all this comes into place. Leveraging this ForeScout technology, Symantec, along with ForeScout, to deliver a holistic solution to our customers through the delivery of policy-based workflow integration, which is essentially a unification of a series of automated tasks in order to automate process flow. Counteract Control Fabric supports many open standards for this integration with Symantec and other sensors, including things like web services, SQL, LDAP, syslog, etc. So it's very open to integration using a variety of standards there. Let's talk about a few Symantec products that will be helpful when we put together this unified and automated process flow. First, we have CCS Standards Manager. CCS stands for Control Compliance Suite, and Standards Manager is just one of the modules of this risk and compliance set of tools that handles measuring configurations of hosts like servers, workstations, web servers, databases, things like that. To do that, we have a rich library of content out of the box, which is a collection essentially of technical checks from industry-recognized sources like Center for Internet Security, benchmarks, and FCAP content. The Standards Manager keeps track of assets in the environment through a discovery capability that allows it to scan the network, understand where hosts are at. It can log into those hosts, determine what operating systems are running, things of that nature. We can also pull data in from repositories like LDAP and structured databases that may have silos of asset information that's helpful to understanding what assets are in the environment, what metadata is necessary to measure those assets. This asset repository within Standards Manager is helpful for scoping the scanning jobs that are going to measure the configurations of those assets, reporting, generating metrics, also role-based access control and things of that nature with the system. Configuration scanning of the host on the network can take place either agentlessly or via an agent, and that gives tremendous flexibility to the administrator in how to set that up in the network. Once a configuration job is customized and then it's run against the host on the network, analytics takes place to produce compliance and risk scores, as well as publish those metrics to like web dashboards to various constituencies so they can consume that information to make better decisions and produce reports and outputs to other systems as well. Integration with a ticket system such as Semantic Service Desk or Remedy allows us then to take the information in terms of what hosts have defects from a configuration perspective and work on remediating those efforts. So a ticket to the server support team to essentially, configure the server in a way that's necessary for security. Next, we have Semantic ITMS. This consists of essentially of 3 modules of our systems management set of products, and many of our customers know this by the name of Altiris. We've rebranded it a bit. These 3 modules include the client, server, and asset management modules that you can see at the bottom of the slide there. Similar to Standards Manager that we just reviewed, ITMS also has the capability of discovering assets on the network through scanning. And when it detects a host out there that it does not have an agent deployed to, and this is an agent-based system, when it identifies a host that doesn't have an agent, it can attempt to auto-deploy that agent onto the host, effectively bringing it under management. And so once an agent's deployed, the management capabilities that an organization have are things like simplified software deployment, patch management, inventory discovery in terms of what hardware and software are on the box, process automation, remote management, and reporting, things like that. ITMS can be a system of record for IT assets for the organization, so like a CMDB, and can track compliance with hardware or software standards. So if you have whitelists and things like that, we can track compliance against those. We can also enable the lifecycle management of assets all the way from acquisition all the way through retirement. And it has a tremendous amount of platforms that we support, including Windows, Linux, virtual machines, and Mac support as well. Lastly, we'll discuss SEP. This is Semantic Endpoint Protection, and it's our leading endpoint security product. As our customers have known for quite some time, antivirus, in terms of the old signature-based detect and destroy mechanism, has become quite ineffective due to a variety of reasons, including advanced obfuscation and polymorphic and encryption techniques being employed by a lot of malware, not to mention the sheer number of new signatures that are being created on a day-to-day basis. So signature-based detection and mitigation has been less than perfectly effective for quite some time. As such, SEP for quite some time has offered a suite of layered protection designed to detect, stop, and remove even the most advanced malware threats out there. So this slide shows some of the layered technologies that we're using in the product. We leverage the world's largest global intelligence network, made up of hundreds of millions of sensors that essentially feed data into this network. And we then analyze that and use it to inform SEP and other products in Symantec's portfolio to tune against the threats that we're seeing and analyzing in this global intelligence network. So, for example, leveraging this intelligence goldmine is our unique insight technology, which identifies file reputations by analyzing key attributes. So with all the sensors all around the world, we see things like how often a file has been downloaded, or when a new file is created, or when a file under the same name has a different signature, and how long that file has been there, and what the reputation of the site that file is coming from, things like that. So that allows us to essentially block more threats and defend against new mutating malware, because those types of malwares have certain signatures that we can key on using that intelligence. Sonar, the technology also powered by global intelligence, monitors application behavior on this host in real time and stops targeted attacks and zero-day threats. Network threat protection analyzes incoming data streams, and we can essentially block threats as they hit the system there. And finally, Power Eraser enables us to remove malware infections completely from the system. So leveraging these advanced capabilities, the SEP product detects and removes more threats than any solution out there, in its class, and we repeatedly score AAA rating, which is the highest score from the independent Dentist Labs real-world AV test. So now I'll pass it over to Sean for a discussion on ForeScout technologies. Sean.
Thanks, Tom. So we're going to briefly discuss ForeScout's value proposition and really supporting continuous monitoring, remediation, and security mitigation and access control. So when we think of ForeScout, we think of network access control, and it is true. We are one of the industry's leading access control providers out there. However, network access control is something we do. It's not what defines us. We actually have three main value propositions that we can help agencies protect themselves, such as agentless asset discovery, workflow automation. What I mean by that is taking simple task automation and combining multiple tasks so that we begin to automate process, and we'll show that in some of the use cases coming up. And then obviously access control. So starting with the top, it begins with continuous visibility. Now how we drive that visibility and maintain it is we ensure that endpoint authentication and inspection. And what we mean by that is, do I know the device? Is it trusted? Is the person on the right device? Are they doing the right things? Is the system up to date? From there, we can leverage, and over here, going on to the next ball, we have several vendors that we do integrate with out of the box, including Symantec, ArcSight, FireEye, Tenable. ForeScout actually has over 66 out-of-the-box vendor integrations, third-party integrations. Many of them are bi-directional, and we also have hundreds more possible with our open integration module. What we're able to do then is then not only take information to improve our situational awareness, but as we were saying previously, feed that asset intelligence and system intelligence and behavioral intelligence back to those systems. Moving on there, we're then able to then take a more intelligent approach to network enforcement, because we can take the intelligence of a FireEye system that has just identified a new piece of malware, scan the environment for that malware, and take appropriate controls by either alerting the help desk on what systems are also infected with this malware, or controlling and containing those systems so that they can be cleaned properly while either limiting their business functionality or in some cases, as appropriate by the agency's policies, restricting it altogether. We're able to then take feeds and work intelligently with endpoint mitigation and auto-remediate security issues such as patch management, issuing a patch or issuing a trigger event to something like ITMS to patch an unpatched system, which we'll show you later. And again, same systems we have on the left as we do on the right, but again, that is just a sample of the systems that we're able to support and deliver to. All of this then provides that continuous visibility that we have, that we provide to our customers. So the actual Symantec and ForeScout unified cybersecurity solution value proposition is before you. And we have 5 main points. I won't read the whole slide, but basically it begins with, as we've been saying, visibility. Discover the asset. Identify who is on it, what is it, where is it located, and what is its overall health or cyber hygiene. Is it managed? Is it unmanaged? Is it a rogue system? Is it a bring your own device? From there, we then look to automate the compliance assessment of your tool. And we can then, through a policy-driven automation set of controls and best practices, continuously analyze, as opposed to waiting for a point-in-time scan, continuously analyze in real time the compliance assessment of your endpoints. This is both a flexible and an extensible system to assess that compliance. From there, we're able to also invoke automated remediation. Now, automated remediation, what we're talking about here is more of the simple, low-line OS application configuration and processes, stuff that's routine in any general automation practice that you look to do, is to hit that 80% that is common, that then allows your operations staff to become more proactive and look for new threats and support new ways to keep your environment secure. The UCSS is interoperable. It will work within your existing IT infrastructure. We're not selling a framework here. What we're selling is a modular solution that can help you manage and maintain your legacy investments. So it's not all or nothing. You can take pieces or parts of the solution and incorporate that into your environment. And what we find is this helps deliver a much higher ROI by, again, delivering that automated continual compliance management. taking that common, taking that 80%, automating it, and making it basically down to where it can be executed on a regular basis by either a tool, or another way is we can take the goodness of a Tom who would be a tier 3, tier 4 architect, very high priced, very very powerful engineer, take his goodness and work that into the UCSS solution, and now have a layer 2 or tier 2 engineer operate at that capacity. And we're expanding now your operational capacity by allowing you to do more with less. So on the next slide, we're going to basically go over the 4 use cases that we have here before you. The first one is a very simple device discovery use case where we're going to illustrate how ForeScout detects and discovers assets and asset configuration data, and then can feed that into your Symantec tools, IT Management Suite, Control Compliance Suite, and Symantec Endpoint Protection. The second use case is we're going to illustrate our ability to identify a rogue asset and then feed that event data into ITMS so that your operations help desk can take proactive action against that. We'll then show how we can augment SEP and assist it in being even more powerful than it already is by disallowing people to disable the agents and then install software that they wouldn't normally be allowed to. And finally, we'll talk about more how we can promote cyber hygiene with more of a workflow automation where we're combining multiple tools into a consistent and automated workflow. So in this first use case here, we have a very high-level reference model where on the very top we have our Symantec IT Management Suite, Control Compliance Suite, and Endpoint Protection. In the middle, we have ForeScout's Control Fabric, which is really your discovery and integration point into these other tools. And then below is a representation of an agency or an organizational environment. So what ForeScout does is provides a comprehensive discovery of connected devices. And we do that through a litany of ways. We're event-driven. We don't necessarily rely on point-in-time scans, although we do support that. We are generally integrated into the network fabric. So as your network switch or component identifies a new connection, we catch that trigger in real time. And what this does is, rather than waiting for days, weeks, or months of a point-in-time scan to detect the asset, we'll detect it instantaneously. From there, we're able to feed Symantec's tools with real-time asset awareness and situational awareness data so that they can complete their own discoveries and then take action against either previously undiscovered assets or deal with newly detected assets that may not fit the corporate or the organizational mold, such as an unknown device or potentially a rogue device. On this next use case, we're going to quickly illustrate how a rogue asset would be handled. So the rogue device connects to the network, and ForeScout detects it as a rogue device as it's behaving improperly. We will then feed, we will actually quarantine the dead device off the network to mitigate its threat and stop it from harming anything. We'll then feed a trigger event up to the IT Management Suite to either open a ticket, issue a job, send an email to the right help desk group or whatnot. And why this is important is rogue assets are detected at the event, at the point in time in which they're connected to the network. So a lot of intelligent adversaries, learn when point-in-time scans are. They know that after Patch Tuesday, this agency or this organization will have their patches up by Thursday. They're going to do a scan Friday. So they're going to shut everything down on Thursday and Friday and then essentially bring their environment back up on potentially Saturday. Now, this is a hypothetical, but it's actually a fairly common hypothetical. What we can do is at that point of detection, we can circumvent essentially or proactively augment that point-in-time scan by feeding that same data, that same rogue data, up to an IT Management Suite or a ticketing system so that our operations team can take access and then quarantine and manage that device. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Tom, who's going to finish up our last 2 use cases. Tom?
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate that. And, in the use cases that we just reviewed, we've talked about the idea of these rogue assets, and we should not be comfortable with rogue assets on our network any longer than necessary, any more than, a bank should be comfortable with somebody snooping around the vault. So this, this speaks kind of the cyber hygiene and why it's so important, and some of the capabilities we have together to remediate these issues in real time. We talked a little bit earlier about being able to scan the network with things like CCS and ITMS, but those are scheduled scans, and while they're effective and we can schedule them, frequently, where ForeScout really comes into that equation is giving us that real-time component in between scans, so that we know about those rogue assets almost immediately. In this particular use case, we're going to focus a little bit more on the controls within environment. Oftentimes, controls might have a glitch. A control might go down. Somebody might shut a control down for whatever particular reason, and that window of opportunity while that control is out of service might lead to either intentional or unintentional behaviors that can cause problems. In this particular case, we have SEP protecting a host, and for whatever reason, that agent stopped. Maybe an administrator stops that agent. And then, upon being stopped, an unapproved application gets installed. ForeScout is sitting there on the wire and watching this device and notices that this agent stopped, and it can inform Symantec and an administrator, maybe via an email, restrict access to that device, restart the agent. The agent then detects this unauthorized application and can remediate it. And upon remediation, access is restored. So essentially, this use case shows that in the case of a control failure, ForeScout can come in and provide some additional help and assistance to ensure that a malicious code or something like that doesn't have the opportunity to make impacts on the network. And in this last use case, we're going to talk about the Control Compliance Suite here, and as I mentioned before, it has the ability to measure the compliance of hosts in the environment against standards and what the configurations look like. And part of that measurement is a risk score. So in this particular use case, Symantec is, through Standards Manager, has scanned the network and has identified a high-risk asset. The signal has been sent to ForeScout saying, hey, we have an asset that's high risk, and ForeScout can temporarily remediate that by restricting certain access, maybe to even sensitive information, and then inform the IT management suite that there's some work that needs to be done. ITMS then can deploy the necessary patches or configuration items, fix the issue, and then ForeScout releases that host back into normal service. So this is a way that we can introduce the idea of risk-based remediation to help our customers essentially protect against the threats of something that might be considered high risk in the environment. So I hope we've done a good job demonstrating the power of unifying the Symantec and ForeScout solutions together in a way that helps to increase visibility into your assets and automating some of the tasks, which inevitably will drive down costs and improve security. I'd like to challenge everyone to take a hard look at how well they manage their cyber hygiene today within their networks. Because it not only leads to, good cyber hygiene not only leads to, hardening of their environment against breaches, but it also sets up some key building blocks as we move to some of these more intermediate controls that we discussed in the study earlier that are necessary for protecting a network. And with that, I'm going to introduce our next webinar, where we'll start to get into some of those more advanced and intermediate capabilities. This is going to include techniques such as the automation of cyber hygiene, some more hygiene methods to get that under control in your networks, using automation to free up your skilled cyber security professionals so they can focus on areas where they provide a bigger bang for their buck, leveraging security to ensure compliance is maintained, and reduce successful attacks, breach events, and costs. So that's what we're going to handle in our second webinar, so we hope that you'll join us for that as well. And lastly, we are providing a list of contacts. So if you want to get a hold of Symantec and reach out to understand more about our solutions and capabilities, this will be available in the presentation, which will be made available to you in a PDF format after the event. Sean?
Thanks, Tom. And that concludes really today's presentation. We want to thank everyone for their time, and we'd also like to open it up for any questions that we may have.
Yeah, so this is Steve, the moderator. I'll step back in here, and before we get to the questions, just want to remind our audience that if you do have a question, just look for that Q&A box, type in your question, and hit the submit button. And we've already got some great questions for you, Sean and Tom here, and let's start with this one. It asks, does ForeScout have plugins for Symantec Altiris to aid in the enforcing of patch compliance?
This is Sean. I'll take that one. So essentially, we have the ability to integrate with Altiris through our open integration module, and we would work with that agency to identify, and of course with Symantec to identify the best way. But generally, either through the web API or through a targeted email, we could then send that to their orchestration environment and then allow that environment then push it down. Tom, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'll mention that Altiris is really based on a workflow-based system. So we're designed to interoperate and take cues and signals and pass those out to accomplish a variety of tasks. Every agency is going to have potentially a different workflow in that. There may need to be some approval or change management step or something along that lines that that need to take place before actually enacting change into the environment. Other agencies may have more comfort level with enacting an automated change. So we have a tremendous flexibility in how we can customize that solution for our customers.
All right, great, thank you. Another questioner asks, how does ForeScout uniquely identify a device with multiple NICs? And the same question for SEP-UD.
So with ForeScout, what we would do is we would identify the device, and then we would go in and then identify what NICs are attached to that device. That is somewhat of a manual process, and that is simply because of the nature of the connection. We could do it by MAC address, which would be my recommendation. We could also do it by IP address, but I would recommend against that because IP addresses tend to be less static than MAC addresses. Tom?
Yeah, SEP's an agent-based tool, and so it has the ability to essentially pull that telemetry right off the system itself and measure it that way. Other tools, for example, like TCS, have the ability to have a list of IP addresses, and we use authenticated connectivity into that machine using things like WMI to pull the configuration items out, put them into that list within the asset container. So we'll understand not only the host, but also multiple NICs that may exist on that host as well.
Okay, thank you. Good answer. And a questioner follows up with, does SEP enforce whitelisting?
Yeah, SEP has an application control capability where you can essentially authorize certain apps on the device and enforce that. And so that's a part of the SEP agent and SEP license that you would get when you deploy it. It's not an extra module. It's part of the functionality that you get. So yes, it does have that capability, and we have customers that use it and really appreciate that capability.
Yeah, and here's another question for you. The questioner asks, do I have to purchase the entire suite of tools, or can I integrate this solution to fill my gaps and allow me to leverage my legacy investments?
This is Sean. I'll start off with that. Absolutely, you would be able to basically fill any gaps with the UCSS solution. So if you've already made a legacy investment, we would work with that organization to identify what they have, how it's working today, and then assess how UCSS can complement it so that you could, in fact, hold on to that and leverage that legacy investment. Tom?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, cyber hygiene, while it's a basic building block, and we've been attempting, to get our assets under control for a long time now, it's a little bit of an elusive thing, right? It's essential, but it's also difficult. And so part of the difficulty is that we need to make sure that not only is the proper technologies deployed in the right orders, but that the organization is prepared to, potentially make changes or make the correct moves towards that cyber hygiene. So, for example, you might have different enclaves of asset information held in different systems. And it may be difficult to understand where the overlap is because maybe those different enclaves store information and there's not a common key across those systems. So you have to understand and normalize that data and things like that. So there's a maturity process to getting this done. And part of that part of that maturity process is understanding which technologies to deploy, which order to deploy them, and what are the necessary outcomes of each of those phases. So in many cases, we endorse a phased approach where we use the correct modules of the suite that we've been talking about here today, and help our customers mature at their pace. So you don't have to buy everything all at once to make this happen. We can certainly sit down with you and help you understand the right maturity model and phased approach for you.
Tom, just to add to your Tom, this is Sean again. Just to add to your enclave point, which is an excellent point. The other thing that our solutions is able to do is help you organize your environment into logical components or segments, and that fits very well into the enclave model. We're then able to drive specific policies as it relates to that segment across one solution. To, again, give you that granularity from one set of tools, one solution that allows you to granularly control your different enclaves appropriately. I'm done.
Okay, thanks. Let's see. Moving on, here's a lengthy question. The questioner asks, now regarding asset discovery, many agencies have multiple silos of data and, some overlapping and some more accurate than others. So the question is, what strategies can you recommend to help agencies reconcile these silos to create an accurate centralized system of record for their assets?
Yeah, that's a great question. Al, you want to go, Sean?
Yeah, I'll start off. So go ahead. Again, how ForeScout integrates with the network fabric really helps ascertain that. And again, how we organize into segments and enclaves allows us to discover everything at once. As long as it's connected to the network fabric, we'll be able to discover and find it in lieu of firewall policies or other security controls that may prohibit a point-in-time scan where there's a lot of setup and preparation that needs to be done on top of the actual deployment of your discovery environment to make sure that those scanners or those discovery mechanisms that aren't as well integrated into the network fabric can see those assets when they're supposed to see them. What that gives us then is a faster way and a more accurate way to discover your assets in near real time. Tom?
Yeah, asset discovery and creating this idea of a central asset repository so that you can drive security processes has a lot of different angles to it. It's not only knowing about an asset, knowing about it very quickly, but oftentimes there's metadata required about those assets that may help in understanding the bigger picture. So, for example, I might have a list of shares on my network. That would be, an asset we might want to collect, and that might be underneath the server name that the shares reside on. Another repository of information might have the data sensitivity of those shares, and maybe that comes from an automated tool, or maybe it comes from a manual process, or both. So we have to understand the different enclaves, identifying the enclave where the data is that we want to get at, how often those enclaves refresh that information, and the confidence level that we have in the data in those enclaves. We may have two enclaves that have overlapping host information, asset information, but we have a higher level of confidence related to some of the configuration items in one enclave and a higher confidence level and maybe different ones from the second enclave. So we have to build a reconciliation strategy around some of those data points to essentially build that asset system to be a reliable asset system to drive, like I said, security operations. And doing that requires some thought, but it also requires some technologies that we can bring to bear. We have strong reconciliation capabilities within our product sets. They can help put some of the business logic in and help prioritize confident data over less confident data as being the dominant updating stream for that particular configuration item in the asset record.
Okay, great. Thank you. Just a couple more questions we've got in here. One of the questioners asks, if a new asset is found on the network and we are unable to determine if it is friendly or malicious, what options are available for handling this unknown asset?
John, you want to take that one?
Yeah. So essentially, you're going to begin with the agency or the organization's policy on what to do with unknown assets, and we would then take that policy and inject that into our policy so that if there is a strict agency policy that says we don't know what the asset is, put it into a provisioning network. What we'll do, though, is we'll be able, and then we can quarantine it to a provisioning network, then feed events to something like Altiris or ITMS, have them take appropriate action to then bring it under management, and then properly then release it back out into production. We could test its behavior and look at how it's behaving and functioning, and if it hits any trigger points that are adverse or beyond the scope of what we're willing to allow to behave on our network, we can quarantine that and isolate it immediately, and then allow our ticketing, and then feed the ticketing system in Altiris or other ticketing systems so that our operations and service desks can come in and take appropriate action on that asset. Again, it's doing it in near real time as opposed to waiting for that point-in-time scan. The other litany of things to do is we can actually, so even if the device is undiscoverable, we can provide data to the operations team on what the device is reporting as, and generally your network interface card manufacturer or other attributes that we can look at to help us identify, okay, is this a IP phone or is this a handheld device? We can use those types of inferences to then determine, okay, this is something that we do or don't want on the network, and then take action from there. Tom?
Yeah, that's a good point. I like the point you made about the policy of the organization. And oftentimes, the incident response policy will need to be thought through in terms of what to do about an asset like that. And everybody's going to be different. There's going to be some who are okay with making an automated response. Maybe that automated response is, hey, we don't know anything about this asset, so let's limit its capabilities. Maybe it can still get to things like the intranet and patch update server or whatever. Maybe it can't get to anything. And the other option is that maybe it's a manual process. Maybe the agency is uncomfortable or the organization is uncomfortable with blocking access to this for fear that it could cause some issues. In a hospital environment, for example, there might be some life and health issues associated with decisions that aren't fully understood or aren't confident about making. So that's so everybody's going to have a different reaction to that question, I think. And there's flexibility within our tool sets to build the appropriate response based on the customer policy.
All right, thank you. Well, let's wrap up with this question. It actually came in while you were talking about cyber hygiene in your presentation. It's a two-part question. The questioner asks, first, can you give some examples of what you mean by cyber hygiene? And then, even more important, how do I know where I am currently when compared to industry best practices or my own organizational policies with regard to cyber hygiene?
John, you want to kick us off there?
Yeah, I'll start off there. So with cyber hygiene, what we're talking about with is simply the word hygiene, the health of the system. Is it managed? Is it up to date from a configuration and a patch state within lines with industry best practices and organizational policies? Is it hardened in a certain way? Are we turning off services that aren't necessary? So if a print server only performs these 8 services, these 8 technical services, do we need the other litany of services that may be available when you install a print server out of the box? And so what we're talking about is that basic configuration, that basic control of a device as it comes onto the network. We're also talking about, though, the user as well to some degree, meaning is that user on the right appliance? Are they logging in from an appliance with their own credentials, or is that private workstation or high security workstation being accessed using different credentials? These are types of things that basically delve into the other future webinars that we'll be talking to, but basically cyber hygiene is very similar to what your dentist will say is, what's the hygiene that you're having so that you can fight and combat the known threat and the known vulnerability as prescribed by your agency, organizational policies, and industry best practices. Tom?
Yeah, great response, Sean. And the risk tolerance of an organization will dictate the levels of hygiene that need to be maintained and the details there. So, for example, if you have a critical patch, the critical vulnerability in which a patch is released by the operating system vendor, one organization may say, hey, we have 3 days to deploy that patch. Another might be comfortable with 30. You might say, you might want to use different attributes to help make that decision. So, for example, hey, if it's a production server, it has Tier 1 uptime requirements, and it contains sensitive information, then we have certain policies that dictate how quickly we need to respond to the emerging threats. And that's really where that's the part of hygiene, I think, where our customers have a lot of difficulty, and that is being able to quickly respond to the threat as it evolves, the threat landscape as it evolves and changes every day in a way that promotes security but doesn't disrupt operations. And so that's really what our tool sets and our expertise are able to help our customers figure out and to get better at doing that. And the better you get at doing that, the less security incidents you're going to have and the less successful breaches that you're going to be prone to.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And I'm sorry to say that's all the time we have for our program today. But Tom and Sean, great presentation, and thank you very much for taking the time to answer questions. And I also want to give a special thanks to DLT, ForeScout, and Symantec for sponsoring today's webcast. Now, as I mentioned earlier, if we didn't get to your question, don't worry. We will be emailing answers to unanswered questions we received today. And then I just have a few notes before we sign off. Now, first, if you would like a PDF copy of this presentation, go to the resource list in the lower left-hand corner of the screen and click on Download the Presentation Deck. Next, in the next day or two, we will be emailing you a link to an archived version of the webcast so you can view the presentation again if you like. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, today's webcast was the first in a series of webcasts by today's sponsors looking at automated proactive approaches to cybersecurity. And so our next session, Session 2, will be on automated remediation, and that will be held May 5th at 2 p.m. And then Session 3, which will examine proactive security through behavioral analysis and control, will be held on June 17th, also at 2 p.m. So please mark those dates on your calendar, May 5th and June 17th, for more insights into strengthening your agency's cybersecurity posture. So thank you very much for attending today's webcast, and this concludes our presentation.